It was supposed to be a quiet winter morning. Just a man, a cup of coffee, and the cold air outside his door. But the moment he reached for the handle, his trained German shepherd moved faster than lightning, blocking the exit with a deep, trembling growl. Not playful, not confused. A warning, the kind you only hear when danger is inches away. The air felt wrong. The house fell silent, and suddenly the veteran knew something or someone was waiting for him out there. Something that did not want him to live through the next 5 seconds. And the only thing standing between him and the darkness was the dog God placed at his side. The winter morning in Bend, Oregon had the fragile stillness of a prayer whispered into the frost. The sky hung low and pale, like brushed silver stretched across the horizon. Thin mist drifted among the tall pines, and a faint wind slid through the branches, carrying with it the quiet voice of the mountains. Snow lay in soft layers along the roofs and fences, as though winter preferred tenderness over cruelty here. Inside a cedar-framed house at the edge of town, Ethan Cole stood at his kitchen counter, cradling a mug of dark coffee between scarred hands. Ethan was 37, tall and broad-shouldered, with the disciplined build of a man who had spent years molding his body into a tool of survival. His hair was dark brown, slightly overgrown, brushing the tops of his ears. His eyes were a deep storm blue, steady and observing, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and learned to speak less because of it. He wore a brown leather jacket softened by years of use, a gray sweater beneath it, faded jeans, and old combat boots with worn creases at the ankles, quiet reminders of deserts, docks, and nameless roads he no longer spoke about. To neighbors, Ethan seemed polite, yet distant, always calm, always composed. But beneath the calm lay the lingering ache of loss, teammates gone, missions that ended in silence instead of victory. Those ghosts lived quietly inside him, like shadows that never left the corners of a room. And standing near the fireplace was the one constant presence that anchored him to the here and now. Shadow, a 5-year-old German shepherd, large and powerful, his coat a dark sable blend of deep black and warm brown. His ears stood alert and perfectly shaped, his gaze thoughtful and intelligent. Shadow carried himself with the poised stillness of a seasoned guardian, calm, collected, observant. His loyalty to Ethan was absolute, and his instincts had been sharpened through years of training and survival side by side. Where Ethan was quiet, storm-tide strength, Shadow was grounded certainty. They were partners, family, 2 lives tied together by unspoken trust. The radio hummed faint folk music in the background, while steam rose gently from Ethan's mug. He glanced toward the frost-painted window, watching his breath ghost faintly in the chill air of the room. It felt like any other peaceful winter morning, and that illusion held right up until Ethan walked toward the front door. He slipped his keys into his jacket pocket. His boots thumped lightly across the hardwood floor. His expression was relaxed, almost content. He reached for the doorknob, and then the rhythm of the morning shattered. Shadow rose smoothly from his resting place beside the fireplace. There was nothing frantic in the movement, only purpose. His ears pricked forward, his posture shifted low and centered, every muscle alert. He stepped quietly, deliberately across the living room, and positioned himself directly in front of the door, blocking it, blocking Ethan. The German shepherd did not look back. His body became a living wall, steady, unyielding, protective. Ethan stopped. He blinked once. Then he studied his partner, the way Shadow's tail lowered, the way his muscles tightened ever so slightly, the way his eyes locked onto the door like it was something alive. This was not playfulness. This was not confusion. This was instinct. "Hey," Ethan said gently, his voice low and steady, shaped by years of command softened into care. "What's wrong, buddy?" Shadow didn't move, didn't flick an ear, didn't even blink. A sound escaped the dog's chest, a low, quiet growl, not angry, not aggressive, a warning, ancient, primal, certain, the kind of sound the earth might make before it splits open. Ethan's expression changed, not to fear, but awareness. He had seen Shadow react like this before, in war zones, on night patrols, in crumbling buildings where danger waited behind thin walls and false silence. 1,000 miles away from those places, the posture was exactly the same. His partner was saying one thing: do not go out there. Ethan crouched slowly beside Shadow, resting one steady hand on the dog's back. Shadow's heartbeat was calm, not panicked, but coiled. Ready, focused, not fear, protection. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "Tell me what you see." But Shadow did not shift, not even an inch. His paws rooted into the floor as if the wood itself depended on him. Ethan's training, buried but never gone, began to surface beneath the quiet of the morning. His senses sharpened. The peaceful house no longer felt simply peaceful. It felt watchful. He glanced at the windows, the stillness outside, the pale winter light, the empty street. Nothing appeared wrong, but instinct whispered otherwise. And instinct, Ethan had learned, was rarely wrong, especially Shadow's. He reached a slow hand toward the doorknob. Shadow immediately moved closer, pressing gently, but firmly, against Ethan's leg. The growl deepened, a guardian refusing passage, a silent vow. Ethan paused and breathed. "All right," he said softly, not commanding, not dismissing, but accepting the warning for what it was. He stepped back from the door, and Shadow held the line. Man and dog remained there, shoulder to flank, frozen in quiet understanding. Outside, the winter wind brushed along the eaves like ghost-soft fingers. The world remained quiet, but not peaceful. Not anymore. Something unseen waited beyond that door, something patient, something wrong. And on that still winter morning in Bend, Oregon, Shadow would not let Ethan walk toward it. He would not yield. Because sometimes love becomes a wall between life and death. And on this day, the wall refused to move. The winter sun crept slowly over Bend, Oregon, washing the quiet neighborhood in a pale, hesitant light. The night frost still clung silver to rooftops, and the breath of the morning wind curled softly through the pines. It felt like a world that preferred whispers over voices. Inside his house, Ethan Cole stood a few paces back from the front door, the memory of Shadow's warning still hanging thick in the air. He had learned long ago that true danger rarely arrived loudly. More often, it came like this: quiet, patient, waiting for a careless step. Shadow remained in position before the door, his body relaxed, yet immovable, like a stone guardian who had taken an oath. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the world beyond the wood and metal barrier, refusing to relax. If loyalty ever needed a shape, it would look like him. Ethan did not argue with instinct, his own or Shadow's. So instead of stepping outside, he crossed the room and parted the curtains just enough to see. That was when he noticed it again. The car. A dark blue sedan parked down the street, neat but old, with tinted windows that held on to their secrets. It had been there before, not every day, but often enough that Ethan's mind marked it as a pattern rather than coincidence. He watched. It did not move. Shadow's ears pricked. Time stretched. Then Ethan's phone vibrated on the table. The caller ID showed a familiar name: Grace Turner. Grace lived across the street in a cream-colored house with a sloped garden edged by small stones. She was in her late 40s with chestnut-brown hair touched softly with silver. Tall, a little lean, and carrying herself with the composed strength of someone who had once walked calmly through chaos. Grace had worked for years as a military nurse, caring for the broken, speaking softly into the storms of other people's pain. Those years had carved wrinkles of compassion at the corners of her eyes, and though grief had brushed against her life more than once, it had not hardened her heart. Ethan answered. Her voice came warm but steady through the phone. Calm, controlled, the tone of someone who delivered hard truths gently. "Morning, Ethan. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," he replied. "Everything okay?" There was a soft pause, the kind that exists when someone chooses their words carefully. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "Have you noticed that dark blue sedan parked down the street?" Silence passed between them. "Yes," Ethan answered. "I have." Grace exhaled softly, though not in fear, more in quiet acknowledgement. "It's been there 3 mornings this week," she continued. "Same spot, same time." There was no drama in her voice, just observation, habit, training. Ethan looked at Shadow. Shadow didn't glance back. He simply stayed where he was. Grace went on gently. "I didn't want to bother you, but something about it doesn't sit right. The driver doesn't get out, just sits there, and I can only ever see their hand on the wheel." Ethan trusted people who respected their own unease. "Thank you for calling," he said quietly. Another pause. Then Grace added, in a softer tone that carried more meaning than words alone, "You're not alone out here, Ethan. If something feels wrong, you say the word. All right?" It wasn't pity. It was solidarity between people who had seen how quickly the world could change. "I know," he replied, "and I appreciate it." Her voice warmed just a fraction. "Take care of yourself, and that partner of yours." Shadow's tail flicked once at the sound of distant human voices, but he didn't break posture. They ended the call. Outside, the car remained. Inside, Shadow's stillness deepened, as though the world beyond the door had just confirmed his suspicions. Hours passed in slow, watchful patience. The sedan finally rolled away toward late afternoon, leaving behind only the faint lines of tire tracks pressed into softening snow. But something had already shifted. Grace sat that evening beside her window with a cup of tea resting untouched in her hands. She had once loved a fellow medic overseas. He never came home. Ever since then, she had trusted her instincts, even when they whispered, especially when they whispered. And today, instinct whispered loudly. So she decided, quietly and without ceremony, that she would keep watch, not from fear, but from care, like an older sister, unseen yet steadfast. Across the street, Ethan sat on the floor with his back resting lightly against the sofa. Shadow lay beside him, head pressed against Ethan's leg, muscles still coiled beneath calm fur. The day replayed in Ethan's thoughts. The unmoving car, the steady hand on the wheel, the instinctive refusal of the dog who would rather take a bullet than step aside. Something had arrived in their quiet lives, something that believed patience was a weapon. Ethan rested a hand on Shadow's neck. "I hear you," he murmured. Shadow closed his eyes, but the tension beneath the surface remained. The winter evening settled softly over Bend, Oregon. But the quiet no longer felt like peace. It felt like the breath the world draws in. Right before speaking a truth no one is ready to hear. The wind that moved across Bend that night carried a colder edge than usual, as if winter itself had paused to listen. The blue sedan had not returned since morning, yet the silence it left behind felt occupied. Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table with a map unfolded before him, though he was not truly seeing the paper. His thoughts had slipped into deeper waters, drifting backward through years and oceans, returning to the moment when a name first wrote itself into his life, like a scar. Lucas Merrick. Lucas had once passed for a respectable American businessman. Tall, impeccably dressed, his dark hair neatly cut, his posture sharp and measured. His face was handsome in a severe way, defined angles and cold composure, and his eyes were the color of deep water. Not empty, but too still. People said he had charm. They said he spoke softly and never wasted words. But beneath that polished exterior was a mind that treated human lives like interchangeable pieces in a ledger. He believed in control, in precision, in never being touched by consequence. Years ago, Ethan had met Lucas's name before ever seeing his face. The operation had taken place far from Oregon, along a coastline where salt wind clawed at rusted metal and abandoned docks whispered to the waves. Ethan had still been active duty Navy SEAL then, disciplined, sharp-edged, carrying the calm confidence of a man who trusted his training more than fate. Shadow had not yet gray at the muzzle. The world had still felt like something that could be managed. Their intel had been clear. A private shipping firm was secretly supplying experimental weapons to buyers who were never meant to exist on official records. The man behind it remained a phantom, always careful, always distant, until one night, under a sky swollen with fog, the phantom made a mistake. The team moved like shadows along the waterline. Ethan remembered the flecks of light glittering on black waves. He remembered the smell of oil and salt, and he remembered Shadow walking at his heel, muscles tense beneath dark fur, eyes scanning the darkness with a focus that seemed more than animal. On the dock waited crates the size of coffins, and guarded by armed men stood a figure in a pressed charcoal coat, his posture unhurried despite the circumstances. This was Lucas Merrick in the flesh, a man who treated danger like a business meeting running slightly behind schedule. Lucas did not shout orders. He spoke quietly, and men obeyed. His calm unnerved even veterans. Ethan had watched from the shadows. He had seen the emptiness in Lucas's still eyes. And in that moment, he knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. The raid struck fast. Gunfire cracked like breaking bones in the night air. Shouts, the pounding of boots against wood, crates splintered, men scattered. Shadow leaped with trained precision, pulling down an armed guard before he could turn his weapon. The operation ended not with glory, but with cold exhaustion. The shipment was seized. Lives were spared. But Lucas Merrick walked calmly into the smoke and vanished as though he had stepped into the ocean itself. Official reports spoke in careful words. Dismantled network, unidentified orchestrator, potentially deceased. Ethan never believed that last part. Men like Lucas did not die easily. They slipped beneath the surface and learned to breathe underwater. Back in the present, Ethan pressed his palm against the map and closed his eyes for a second. The pattern forming in Bend, the quiet car, the watching presence. It echoed the calm patience he remembered from that night. He felt something settle in his chest, a recognition. Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on Ethan's boot. His ears twitched at every sound. The bond between them deepened over years of shared survival, not an owner and a pet, but two halves of one watchful life. Shadow had grown stronger with age, more thoughtful in his gaze. There were faint silver threads beginning to touch the fur near his eyes, like early frost. Ethan leaned down and brushed a hand along the dog's back. "I think our ghost found land again," he murmured. Shadow did not move, but his tail thumped once against the floor, not playful, but understanding. Across the street, Grace Turner sat beside her window with a small notebook open in her lap. She had begun tracking the sedan's appearances, not obsessively, simply carefully. Grace was the kind of woman who believed clarity could save lives. The soft lamplight painted warm gold across her gentle features. Her expression was thoughtful rather than frightened. She carried a calm courage born from years of tending to wounded strangers. She sipped tea and let her mind drift. Ethan, the dog, the car, patterns. Her role was not intervention, only awareness. And somewhere she softly whispered a prayer into the quiet room. Not for herself, for those who did not ask for help, even when they needed it. Back in Ethan's house, the past continued to unfold in his mind like a storm cloud rebuilding itself. He remembered the reports afterward, fragments of intercepted messages, whispers from nameless informants. Lucas Merrick had disappeared offshore. No sightings, no financial trace. His wealth dissolved like salt. But rumors insisted he still existed. A ghost with a bank account. A cold architect searching for new foundations. Ethan breathed slowly. It was possible the car had nothing to do with him. Possible? But Shadow did not guard against coincidence, and Ethan no longer believed in it. His phone buzzed once with a short text. Grace. Blue sedan passed again. Did not stop. Polite, calm, informational. She did not speculate. She did not panic. She watched. Ethan typed back only 2 words. Thank you. Hours later, darkness settled over Bend like velvet. Porch lights flickered on one by one. Snow refroze into thin glass sheets. The mountains became silent silhouettes carved from deeper night. Shadow rose and walked once more toward the front door. Not warning, just waiting. A sentinel of fur and bone. Ethan stood nearby. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to. He was already listening to something deeper than sound, and in that stillness, the past finally spoke its truth. Lucas Merrick had never disappeared. He had simply chosen a quieter stage. The thought did not terrify Ethan, it only sharpened him. Because ghosts from the sea rarely returned without purpose. And when they did, they brought storms with them. The wind brushed across the windows like fingers searching for entry. Somewhere beyond Bend, beyond the mountains, beyond all places that felt safe, a man with deep-water eyes sat in a quiet room and thought about a name he had never truly forgotten. Ethan Cole. And the ocean inside him did not move. The winter sun over Bend rose weakly, as though reluctant to face the day. Light spilled slowly across the rooftops, catching on frost that clung stubbornly to every edge. The pines beyond the town whispered faintly in the wind, carrying with them the distant echo of something restless. The world looked peaceful. But inside Ethan Cole's home, peace had thinned into something fragile, stretched tight over unseen tension. Shadow remained near the front door, as he had for days now. The 5-year-old German shepherd sat tall and alert, his sable coat dark against the wooden floor. His ears were forward, his amber eyes fixed on the entrance as though the door itself had become a living threat. He was not afraid. He was resolute, a guardian carved from instinct and loyalty. Ethan stood a short distance away, his tall frame relaxed on the surface, but sharpened beneath. His brown leather jacket hung loosely over a gray sweater, jeans fading at the knees, boots worn from miles of use. The storm blue of his eyes softened when he looked at Shadow, though lines of fatigue had begun to carve a quiet story at their corners. He had been many things in life: son, soldier, leader, survivor. But now he was, above all, a man who had learned to listen. And Shadow was speaking without words. The blue sedan had not come that morning, but its absence did not ease the pressure in the air. Ethan took a slow breath. He was not reckless, but he was methodical. Fear did not guide him. Awareness did. And awareness now demanded proof. He stepped toward the front door. Shadow rose instantly, not with noise, not with panic, with purpose. He planted himself between Ethan and the exit, his large body becoming a solid wall. His head lifted slightly. His eyes, usually warm, steady, honest, now carried something deeper, almost pleading. Ethan paused. The room seemed to pull tighter around them. Shadow's chest expanded with a slow inhale. Then the sound came, soft, barely audible, but filled with ancient meaning. A low growl, not violent, not aggressive. A warning pulled from the marrow of a 1,000-year bond between man and dog. Don't. Ethan crouched slowly, his hand sliding across Shadow's thick coat. The fur was warm beneath his palm. The muscles beneath were tense but controlled. Shadow was not panicked. He was certain. Ethan studied him closely. "You're really not letting me through, are you?" Shadow did not blink. Something inside Ethan tightened, not fear, but recognition. He had seen this expression before, in war zones, in abandoned ports, in buildings where the walls breathed danger. Shadow did not guess. He did not doubt. His instincts were threads woven from scent, vibration, sound, memory. He felt the world at a depth humans would never reach. Still? Ethan needed to know. He rose slowly and moved one step toward the door. Shadow reacted before the thought was finished. The dog stepped forward sharply, his chest pressing into Ethan's legs, stance widening, body braced like a shield. His eyes now carried urgency. His ears locked forward. His breath deepened. The growl returned, richer, stronger, vibrating through the floorboards like distant thunder. This was no longer caution. This was insistence. Ethan froze. His heartbeat steadied, but his mind sharpened into combat clarity. In that silent instant, the years fell away, the missions, the briefings, the narrow escapes. His body responded with the ease of training, muscles aligned, awareness expanded. He listened, truly listened. The wind outside moved lazily past the windows. The house released a faint sigh of wood adjusting to temperature. Then, a sound, so soft it might have vanished into the air. A small, delicate, metallic whisper. Click. Barely more than a breath, barely real at all, but enough. Ethan's blood ran cold. Instinct roared awake inside him. That sound did not belong to nature. It belonged to intention, tiny, precise, waiting. He stepped back immediately, slow and controlled, his gaze never leaving the door. Shadow mirrored him, maintaining position between Ethan and the threat as though their movements were joined by an invisible tether. Silence fell again. Thick, heavy, alive. Ethan's mind moved with frightening calm. He replayed the sound, measured it, placed it. A latch? No. A spring? Possibly. A pressure device? Likely. A trap? Shadow stood perfectly still now. No more growling, no more shifting. His message had been delivered. Ethan swallowed the dryness in his throat. He knew danger. He knew the difference between paranoia and truth. And this was truth. Somewhere beneath that doorframe, something waited. Something silent. Something patient. His thoughts flickered briefly to Grace Turner across the street, the woman with soft brown-silver hair and soldier-steady eyes. She had called him about the sedan. She had trusted her instincts without fear. He wondered whether she felt the same chill now moving beneath the day. He wondered if someone else was watching. Ethan lifted his phone, his movements precise, controlled. Shadow stayed with him, step for step. The bond between them hummed in the air, two lives tuned to the same frequency. He didn't call for panic. He didn't call for help. He simply logged the moment, the sound, the refusal. The silent command, do not cross this threshold. His heart no longer raced. It had become cold, focused, like the ocean at night, deep, steady, unforgiving. He had walked through enough storms to know when the wind had changed. Shadow finally broke eye contact with the door and looked up at Ethan. There was no fear there, only devotion, protective, relentless, alive. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's neck again. "Good boy," he whispered. The words carried gratitude and something else. Respect, because his partner had just saved him from more than inconvenience. He didn't know what waited beyond that door, but he knew this. He was not meant to meet it. Not yet, and not unprepared. Outside, the wind scraped softly across the yard. Inside, the air felt colder now, as if something unseen had smiled. The day continued, but nothing was the same, because once instinct roars, you cannot unhear it. You can only decide whether you will live or ignore it. Ethan chose to live, and Shadow had chosen for him first. The morning light slid quietly across the floor, catching on the dog's dark coat like firelight trapped in stone. The world continued pretending to be peaceful. But inside that quiet house, wariness had taken root, and it would not leave easily. The ghost from Ethan's past had not yet shown its face, but its breath was already at the door, waiting, listening, smiling in the dark. And Ethan knew with a certainty colder than the winter air, instinct is never wrong. Not when it speaks like this, not when it begs you to live. Morning arrived beneath a veil of pale fog that rolled across Bend like ghost breath, soft and silent, yet crawling with quiet intent. Frost glimmered across lawns, and the roads shone faintly under the dim light as though the town had been dipped in glass. The forest whispered at the horizon, and the sky seemed to hold something unsaid. It was the kind of day where even the wind hesitated. Inside his home, Ethan Cole stood perfectly still. The memory of that tiny metallic click lay suspended in the air like a razor thread between worlds. Shadow remained pressed between Ethan and the front door, his large sable frame radiating unwavering resolve. His amber eyes flickered once toward Ethan as if to ask for trust one more time. Ethan answered without words. He stepped back. Another life might have dismissed the sound, but Ethan's world had never been gentle enough for coincidence. He did not touch the door again. Instead, he reached for his phone. He called the sheriff's office first, his voice steady and stripped of anything unnecessary. Facts only. Possible device. Do not open the door. No panic. Then he made the second call. The bomb squad. Within 40 minutes, the quiet neighborhood blossomed into controlled precision. Emergency vehicles moved silently into position as though respectful of the morning hush. No sirens, no shouting. Only calm purpose. Shadow watched every motion. The lead technician was Captain Miles Harrington, a man in his early 50s with iron-gray hair cut close to his head and deep-set hazel eyes shaped by years of concentration. He stood tall, shoulders still broad, despite age, carrying the stillness of someone who refused to panic no matter the stakes. Lines across his face spoke of long nights and narrow escapes. He believed deeply in procedure. He believed even more deeply in courage without theatrics. Behind him walked Tessa Monroe, mid-30s, slender but strong, her dark blonde hair braided tightly against her head beneath her protective hood. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a focused expression that rarely wavered. Years ago, she had lost a friend in a detonation accident during training. Since then, her work had become a personal vow. Nobody would meet that fate again if she could stop it. They greeted Ethan with professional gravity. "Mr. Cole," Miles said quietly, his tone calm as winter stone. "We need you to remain inside, away from the entryway. You did the right thing not opening that door again." Ethan nodded. "Shadow warned me." Miles' gaze softened for half a second as he studied the German shepherd. "Good partner?" Shadow held his ground, silent and composed. The team began their work. They moved with slow precision, scanning the porch, the threshold, the minute seams of wood and metal. Tessa's gloved hands traced the underside of the steps with the patience of someone reading a dangerous prayer. Then she stilled. Her voice came low and measured. "Found it." Time seemed to narrow. Beneath the front step, hidden within a carefully carved hollow, sat a small device shaped with elegant cruelty. It was compact, sleek, wrapped in wires so fine they looked like strands of hair. A pressure trigger was placed with surgical precision beneath the doorframe. One wrong movement, one careless step, and the world would have ended in fire. Tessa steadied her breathing. "This is sophisticated." Miles crouched over her shoulder, studying every wire as if listening to them speak. His brow furrowed. "This isn't amateur work." Ethan watched through the window, jaw tightening. Not fear, Realization. Someone had wanted him to die quietly, without witnesses, without mercy. Shadow leaned closer to the glass, gaze intent. He did not whine, did not bark. He only watched the weapon that had waited for his handler's final step. The team worked methodically, a clamp here, a slow release there, wires held still as fragile veins of fate. And then it was over, safely disarmed, lifted away like a venom tooth. Miles let out a slow breath. "We'll take it to the lab, but whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing." Ethan already knew the name before it was spoken. Lucas Merrick, the ocean-eyed ghost who never left the world cleanly. While the device was carried away in sealed cases, another quiet battle was unfolding across town. Grace Turner sat at her dining table with a laptop open and a notepad beside it. Sunlight filtered gently through lace curtains, illuminating the calm poise she carried like a second skin. Her brown-silver hair was pulled into a loose bun, and the soft lines of age around her eyes spoke of kindness that had survived sorrow rather than surrendered to it. Grace had never been loud in life. She was patient, and now patience served her well. She began digging, public records first, old federal filings, shipping manifests, buried corporate ties. Then she went deeper into articles that had nearly vanished beneath the tide of years. One name surfaced again and again, like a buoy rising through water. Lucas Merrick, investor, shipping magnate, ghost. He had once quietly purchased land in Oregon, near the coast, near Bend, then disappeared from all official record. Her fingers paused over the keys. Her heart beat once, heavy. She traced the thread again, verifying every piece. She did not want to be wrong. She did not want to feed fear with imagination. Grace respected truth too much for that. But the truth refused to soften. Lucas had returned to Oregon, and someone of his nature never returned without purpose. She closed her eyes for a moment, offering a silent prayer not for herself but for Ethan, the quiet man who seemed to carry storms behind his eyes, and the loyal dog who refused to let death pass through the door. Grace picked up her phone. She hesitated, not out of doubt, but because she knew words had weight. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Ethan, I think I know who may be behind this." Outside, the fog thickened around the quiet neighborhood like a curtain. Inside Ethan's home, Shadow rested against his leg, still alert, still listening. Ethan felt the world tighten into focus. The trap had not been random. The past had come home, and the ghost from the sea had chosen his stage carefully. Not a battlefield, not a port, but a quiet house in winter mist, where death might have arrived wearing silence, but it had been stopped by love wrapped in fur. For now, that was enough. The device was gone. The house breathed again, but the hunt had begun. And on some distant shore inside his memory, Ethan could almost hear the ocean answering back. The winter sky over Bend sagged low and pale, as if the clouds themselves were tired. Snow still clung to the rooftops, and the air carried the thin chill of a world that hadn't fully woken yet. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that pretends to be peace. Inside Ethan Cole's home, silence had weight. The bomb squad had already come and gone. The device beneath the front step was gone too, taken apart and sealed away into evidence crates. Yet the echo of that faint metallic click still seemed to hang in the hallway, like a whisper that refused to leave. Shadow lay on the living room floor, his sable coat warm against the cold light, amber eyes awake and listening. He rested, but he did not relax. Ethan stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee that had long since cooled, his tall frame still, his expression thoughtful. Lines etched faintly at the corners of his eyes, the kind drawn not by age but by years of watching, waiting, and making decisions that mattered. Today, those eyes were steady, assessing, remembering that he had nearly stepped into death, and that Shadow had refused to let him. At the end of the street, Janice Whitlow continued her route. Wrapped in a thick jacket and wool hat, the short, softly built mail carrier moved from house to house with the calm rhythm of someone who believed in routines. She didn't know about the bomb. She didn't know about the ghost of a man named Lucas Merrick. She only knew whose mailbox was next. She slipped letters into Ethan's mailbox and walked on. A few minutes later, Ethan stepped outside just far enough to collect the mail. His movements were careful, not fearful. The difference mattered. Shadow stood at the doorway, watching him with unwavering focus until he stepped back inside. He sorted through the envelopes at the kitchen counter. Bills, advertisements, and one plain white envelope. No return address, his name written on the front in calm black ink. Ethan Cole. The handwriting was disciplined, exact. The hand of a man who believed control was a virtue. Ethan opened it slowly, then unfolded the paper inside. One sentence waited. A savior is never allowed to rest. Below the words, a symbol shaped like a curling wave had been drawn with the same careful precision. There was no signature. None was needed. Lucas Merrick had finally spoken. Lucas did not want Ethan dead. Not yet. Death was too final. Lucas preferred control. He preferred the kind of fear that seeped into ordinary hours, that changed the meaning of a quiet morning or a closed door. This letter was not an attack. It was the performance. And Ethan was meant to feel the spotlight. Shadow stepped closer and pressed his head gently against Ethan's leg. His warmth was grounding. His loyalty was simple, uncomplicated truth. Ethan rested a hand on the thick fur behind his neck. Then he stopped being a target and became a soldier again. He sat down at his desk with his laptop open, the pale winter light spilling across stacks of old files and quiet notebooks. He wasn't a hacker. He wasn't a spy. But he understood how patterns hide. He searched public records, business filings, shipping logs, land purchases tucked inside shell companies that changed names just slightly, like someone wearing different masks while insisting they were a stranger. Slowly, steadily, the trail curved in one direction. Back to Oregon. Lucas Merrick had returned, not loudly, but undeniably. Ethan leaned back, Shadow resting at his feet. No panic rose in him, just certainty. Lucas didn't want his life. Lucas wanted his balance. The phone rang. Grace Turner's voice came gently through the line. She was calm, warm, steady, the way someone becomes after years of being needed in the worst moments of other people's lives. She didn't ask for details. She didn't pry. She simply checked in the way a good neighbor and a better soul would. "Just wanted to make sure you're doing all right," she said. He didn't tell her about Lucas, but she heard what he didn't say, and she answered softly, "You're not alone here." When the call ended, the house felt different, not safer, but less solitary. Silence settled like a companion rather than a weight. Ethan folded the letter and placed it away. Not destroyed. Recorded. Remembered. Shadow remained beside him. Outside town, fog slipped between the pines. A lone German shepherd moved through the trees, his black and silver fur merging with the shadows, his golden eyes thoughtful and wary. Dakota, a wanderer, drawn slowly, unknowingly, toward the life gathering inside Bend. And somewhere far beyond, Lucas Merrick sat in his quiet hideaway and believed the game was his again. He did not yet understand what stood against him. Shadow, grace, and the kind of loyalty that does not fracture. Lucas's letter declared that a savior was not allowed to rest, but love and loyalty do not rest either. And they were already awake. The winter forest outside Bend was wrapped in silence. Snow lay deep among the tall pine trunks, soft and undisturbed, as though the world had paused to listen. The air was pale and still. Even the sky seemed to hold its breath. Days earlier, Ethan had noticed the truck, a faded blue pickup. Older model. Paint chipped along the passenger door. It had appeared twice before near his neighborhood, parked in the same quiet stretch of road, facing his house, never staying long, just long enough to watch. And on the morning before the bomb was discovered, it had idled there once more before vanishing down the northern road. Ethan remembered the way its tires had rolled over old gravel. He remembered the sound, and he did not forget. After the device beneath his doorstep had been removed, he began quietly retracing the movements of the blue truck. Public traffic cameras, service road logs, snowplow route recordings. He followed the truck's trail like a thread through cloth until it disappeared near a secluded forest access road north of town. From there, he dug deeper. Property records, old leasing files. Hidden under a shell company name he recognized from Lucas Merrick's financial trail sat a single listing. A remote cabin, no permanent address, no neighbors, just trees, snow, and silence. It was enough. Now he moved through the forest with measured steps, his breath leaving small clouds in the frozen air. He wore a dark winter jacket lined with quiet resilience. His gaze remained steady, focused, accepting of whatever waited ahead. Shadow traveled at his side. The German shepherd's sable fur blended into the muted tones of winter earth and bark. His muscles shifted beneath his coat in calm, ready motion. His amber eyes watched the world with unwavering awareness. He didn't fear the forest. He simply guarded his human inside it. At the edge of the forest road, Grace Turner waited near a parked Forest Service SUV, her long coat wrapped around her like a quiet promise that she would remain present even when she could not follow. Her brown and silver hair stirred gently in the wind. Though the lines of worry traced her features, there was warmth behind them, the kind forged through years of tending to the broken and the brave alike. She trusted Ethan, and she trusted the dog who refused to leave him. So she waited. The world narrowed as Ethan and Shadow stepped deeper between the snow-laden trees. The sound of the SUV faded into stillness. Pine needles brushed faint patterns into the white ground. And then the small cabin came into view. Wood darkened by age and weather, chimney long cold, windows reflecting only winter sky. He did not announce himself. He didn't need to. Lucas Merrick stepped from the shadow of the cabin before Ethan reached the clearing. He wore a black wool coat that hung neatly across his slender frame. His pale blonde hair had been carefully combed back. His face remained sharp, almost elegant, yet empty, as though some essential warmth had been carved away years ago. His gray eyes held no panic, only calculation and disappointment. "I expected you," Lucas said quietly. He glanced at Shadow, then back at Ethan. "I suppose I should have chosen a different truck." His voice carried the faintest trace of humor, the kind that believed itself superior. Ethan didn't smile. "You left enough," he replied. Lucas's shoulders lifted in a slow, thoughtful breath. "You followed the records, the corporations, the vehicle. I underestimated your patience." His gaze shifted to the snow beneath their boots. "I misjudged loyalty, too." Shadow stood between them, not tense, not threatening, just present, a living barrier. Lucas's tone softened. "I never wanted your death, only your understanding. Fear is clarity. Instability is honest. You were supposed to learn that the world is never safe, that peace is an illusion." Ethan's voice remained steady. "You brought violence into people's homes." Lucas nodded as though grading a test. "And you brought war to my operations years ago. We are the same story, written from opposite ends." Shadow's ears flicked forward. A faint motion crossed Lucas's hand beneath his coat. It happened in less than a breath. Shadow moved. His body became a silent streak across the snow. He struck with calm precision, jaws closing around Lucas's wrist just before metal could clear the coat pocket. Lucas cried out in shock as a small pistol slipped from his grasp and disappeared into white snow. Ethan stepped forward. He pinned the weapon beneath his boot. Shadow released the instant control was certain, returning at once to his guardian stance beside Ethan, chest lifted, breath steady, eyes locked. Lucas stared down at the snow, then slowly lifted his gaze. For the first time, fear cracked the stillness inside his eyes. "You trusted a dog," he whispered. Ethan shook his head. "I trusted loyalty." There were no raised voices, no threats, no triumph, just the slow exhale of winter air as Ethan secured restraints around Lucas's wrists. Practiced, efficient, without cruelty. It was over. Truly over. The forest seemed to sigh when the tension left it. The pines swayed gently, brushing their branches like hands releasing old ghosts. Ethan guided Lucas down the forest path toward the waiting SUV. Grace watched them emerge from the trees. She said nothing at first. She simply placed a hand over her heart, steadying it, relief spreading gently across her features. Shadow walked proud and silent beside Ethan. He did not need praise. He did not seek reward. He had done the thing loyalty demanded, and the world had been steadied because of it. Law enforcement vehicles arrived soon after, engines humming softly beneath the winter sky. Officers spoke quietly. Paperwork began. Lucas Merrick no longer resisted. The calm that once belonged to him had broken like thin glass. He kept his gaze downward. No sirens pierced the air. No gunshots echoed. Only wind. Only breath. Only closure. As Lucas was taken away, Grace looked at Ethan and Shadow, the man and the guardian who had walked into the snow and come back out changed, yet somehow lighter. And above them, the tall winter pines whispered like old storytellers who had finally reached the last line of a long, haunted chapter. The nightmare ended without fire, without death, only stillness, and the sound of a loyal heart beating beside a human one. Spring arrived quietly in Bend, as though it did not wish to disturb the fragile peace that had finally settled over the town. The snow retreated first from the rooftops, then from the pine roots, then from the bends of the roads. The cold breath of winter softened into something warmer, something that felt like forgiveness. The sky turned lighter, brighter, and the earth began breathing again. Ethan Cole stood on the porch of his small house at the forest's edge, watching sunlight stretch across the clearing like a patient blessing. His dark hair had grown slightly longer, and the quiet lines around his eyes seemed softer now, as if the weight behind them had loosened its grip. He wore a simple flannel shirt and well-worn jeans, not the clothes of a soldier, but of a man who finally allowed himself to belong somewhere. Shadow lay stretched across the wooden boards beside him. The German shepherd's sable fur shimmered in the new light. His body relaxed in a way it had not been for months. His breathing was slow and even. His amber eyes, once sharpened by ceaseless vigilance, now watched the horizon with a gentler gaze. He still listened to the world, still guarded by instinct, but the tension had melted from his posture like snow giving way to grass. He was a guardian still, only now his watch had become peaceful. Grace Turner arrived mid-morning with a basket of warm bread. She walked along the gravel path toward the house, wrapped in a light cardigan the color of faded cream. Her chestnut silver hair rested softly along her shoulders, and a serene kindness steadied every step she took. Grace had always carried the air of someone familiar with grief, but now there was light behind her eyes, the light that appears when a burden is shared rather than shouldered alone. She had become something more than a neighbor. She had become the quiet kind of family that life sometimes gifts when it apologizes for earlier storms. Ethan greeted her with a smile that no longer had to fight its way past Shadow. They spoke easily in the kitchen while sunlight stretched across the table. Grace's voice carried warmth, the warmth of someone who chose hope every day, even when she had every reason not to. She had tended too many wounded souls in too many distant places to take peace for granted now. Watching Ethan at ease, she seemed grateful, not for drama, not for events, but simply for the sight of a man allowed to rest. Later that day, a child ran past the property line chasing a bright red kite. Her name was Lily Sanderson. She was 9 years old, thin as a reed, with messy blonde hair and a missing front tooth. She lived in town with her father, Tom Sanderson, a quiet carpenter with hands roughened by work and a gentle voice that rarely rose above calm. Lily laughed as the wind tugged at the kite string and the sound filled the clearing like music. When the kite fluttered too low, Shadow lifted his head just slightly, ears tilting forward. Then he relaxed again. The world was safe. Ethan watched the child laughing in the sun and felt something inside him become still in the best way possible. He had spent years walking through danger, carrying the weight of responsibility like armor. He had believed once that the world was only held together by force and vigilance. But now he saw another truth, a softer one, that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of connection. The laughter outside, the warmth inside, the silent companionship at his feet. Shadow shifted position and rested his head against Ethan's boot. The simple gesture felt like a vow. When evening fell, Grace stayed for supper. They sat together at the wooden dining table, a simple meal between them, the warm glow of lamplight softening every corner of the room. Grace spoke of her past with honesty, of the lives she had once tended to in faraway bases, of soldiers who feared sleep, of quiet prayers whispered into sterile halls. Losing so much had once hollowed her. Now, being here, seeing life continue, filled that space with something new. Ethan listened, not as a broken man, but as a living one. Shadow lay near the hearth, curled comfortably, his chest rising and falling like a gentle tide. The house, once a place stalked by dread, now carried the sound of subdued laughter, quiet conversation, and the occasional low, contented sigh of a resting dog. It felt like life had moved back in and set its suitcase down. Later, when Grace left, Ethan returned to the porch. The sky above the forest glowed faintly purple as spring dusk settled like velvet across the treetops. Fireflies began to spark among the branches, brief flickers of wonder lighting the world one star at a time. Shadow sat beside him. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rhythm of a loyal heart. He understood something then, not as a thought, but as a truth. He had not saved the world. He had simply been given the chance to remain inside it. He had been pulled back from darkness by a creature who owed him nothing, by loyalty without condition, kindness without question, presence without demand, and by a woman who reminded him that broken things do not always stay broken. Love had not arrived loudly. It had crept back like dawn, and it had stayed. Morning light returned to Bend, soft, lasting, and eternal as the quiet companionship between a man and the dog who had refused to let him walk alone. Sometimes God does not send miracles wrapped in bright light or thunder. Sometimes He sends them quietly, in the shape of a loyal friend with four paws, or in the form of unexpected kindness that appears when we need it most. Ethan did not save the world. Instead, God used love, loyalty, and companionship to save Ethan. And maybe that is the greatest miracle of all. Not lightning, not fire, but the gentle reminder that we are never truly alone and that heaven still watches over those who walk through darkness with faith in their hearts. As you go back to your own life, your routines, your quiet mornings and long nights, remember this story. Remember that God can work through the smallest signs. Through a warning, through a friend, through a dog who refuses to step aside, And if He can protect Ethan in the silence of a winter forest, He can protect you too. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell your story. And if you believe that God still sends miracles into this world, sometimes covered in fur and loyalty, type one simple word below to let your faith speak. Amen, and may God bless you and your family today and always.